The Last Days of Shandakor by Leigh Brackett. Chapter 1. He came alone into the wine shop, wrapped in a dark red cloak, with the cowl drawn over his head. He stood for a moment by the doorway, and one of the slim, dark, predatory women who live in those places went to him with the silvery chiming from the little bells that were almost all she wore. I saw her smile up at him, and then suddenly the smile became fixed, and something happened to her eyes. She was no longer looking at the cloaked man, but through him. In the oddest fashion, it was as though he had become invisible. She went by him. Whether she passed some word along or not, I couldn't tell, but an empty space widened around the stranger, and no one looked at him. They did not avoid looking at him, they simply refused to see him. He began to walk slowly across the crowded room. He was very tall, and he moved with a fluid, powerful grace that was beautiful to watch. People drifted out of his way, not seeming to, but doing it. The air was thick with nameless smells, shrill with the laughter of women. 2 tall barbarians, far gone in wine, were carrying on some intertribal feud, and the yelling crowd had made room for them to fight. There was a silver pipe and a drum and a double-banked harp, making old, wild music. Lithe brown bodies leaped and whirled through the laughter and the shouting and the smoke. The stranger walked through all this, alone, untouched, unseen. He passed close to where I sat, perhaps because I, of all the people in that place, not only saw him, but stared at him. He gave me a glance of black eyes from under the shadow of his cowl. Eyes like blown coals, bright with suffering and rage. I caught only a glimpse of his muffled face, the merest glimpse, but that was enough. Why did he have to show his face to me in that wine shop in Barrakesh? He passed on. There was no space in the shadowy corner where he went, but a space was made, a circle of it, a moat between the stranger and the crowd. He sat down. I saw him lay a coin on the outer edge of the table. Presently, a serving wench came up, picked up the coin, and set down a cup of wine. But it was as if she waited on an empty table. I turned to Kardak, my head drover, a Shuni with massive shoulders and uncut hair braided in an intricate tribal knot. "What's all this about?" I asked. Kardak shrugged. "Who knows?" He started to rise. "Come, John Ross, it is time we got back to the serai." "We're not leaving for hours yet, and don't lie to me. I've been on Mars a long time. What is that man? Where does he come from?" "Barrakesh is the gateway between north and south. Long ago, there were oceans in equatorial and southern Mars, when Valkis and Jakara were proud seats of empire and not thieves' dens. Here, on the edge of the northern drylands, the great caravans had come and gone to Barrakesh for 1,000 years. It is a place of strangers. In the time-eaten streets of rock, you see tall Keshi hillmen, nomads from the high plains of Upper Shun, lean dark men from the south who barter away the loot of forgotten tombs and temples, cosmopolitan sophisticates up from Kahora and the trade cities, where there are spaceports and all the appurtenances of modern civilization. The red-cloaked stranger was none of these. A glimpse of a face. I am a planetary anthropologist. I was supposed to be charting Martian ethnology, and I was doing it on a fellowship grant I'd wangled from a Terran university, too ignorant to know that the vastness of Martian history makes such a project hopeless. I was in Barrakesh, gathering an outfit preparatory to a year's study of the tribes of Upper Shun. and suddenly there had passed close by me a man with golden skin and unmartian black eyes and a facial structure that belonged to no race I knew. I'd seen the carven faces of fauns that were a little like it. Cardack said again, "It is time to go, John Ross." I looked at the stranger, drinking his wine in silence and alone. "Very well, I'll ask him." Cardack sighed. "Earthmen," he said, "are not given much to wisdom." He turned and left me. I crossed the room and stood beside the stranger. In the old, courteous High Martian they speak in all the low canal towns, I asked permission to sit. Those raging, suffering eyes met mine. There was hatred in them, and scorn and shame. "What breed of human are you?" "I am an Earthman." He said the name over, as though he had heard it before, and was trying to remember. "Earthmen. Then it is as the winds have said, blowing across the desert, that Mars is dead, and men from other worlds defile her dust." He looked out over the wine shop, and all the people who would not admit his presence. "Change," he whispered, "death and change, and the passing away of things." The muscles of his face drew tight. He drank, and I could see now that he had been drinking for a long time, for days, perhaps for weeks. There was a quiet madness on him. "Why do the people shun you?" "Only a man of earth would need to ask," he said, and made a sound of laughter, very dry and bitter. I was thinking, a new race, an unknown race. I was thinking of the fame that sometimes comes to men who discover a new thing, and of a chair I might sit in at the university if I added one bright, unheard-of piece of the shadowy mosaic of Martian history. I had had my share of wine, and a bit more. That chair looked a mile high and made of gold. The stranger said softly, "I go from place to place in this wallow of Barrakesh, and everywhere it is the same. I have ceased to be." His white teeth glittered for an instant in the shadow of the cowl. "They were wiser than I, my people. When Shandakor is dead, we are dead also, whether our bodies live or not." "Shandakor," I said. It had a sound of distant bells. "How should an Earthman know? Yes, Shandakor. Ask the men of Kesh and the men of Shun. Ask the kings of Mech, who are half around the world. Ask of all the men of Mars. They have not forgotten Shandakor, but they will not tell you. It is a bitter shame to them, the memory and the name." He stared out across the turbulent throng that filled the room and flowed over to the noisy street outside. "And I am here among them, lost." "Shandakor is dead?" "Dying. There were 3 of us who did not want to die. We came south across the desert. One turned back, one perished in the sand. I am here in Barrakesh." The metal of the wine cup bent between his hands. I said, "And you regret your coming?" "I should have stayed and died with Shandakor. I know that now, but I cannot go back." "Why not?" I was thinking how the name John Ross would look, inscribed in golden letters on the scroll of the discoverers. "The desert is wide, Earthman, too wide for one alone." And I said, "I have a caravan. I am going north tonight." A light came into his eyes, so strange and deadly that I was afraid. "No," he whispered, "no." I sat in silence, looking out across the crowd that had forgotten me as well, because I sat with the stranger. A new race, an unknown city, and I was drunk. After a long while, the stranger asked me, "What does an earthman want in Shandakor?" I told him. He laughed. "You study men," he said, and laughed again, so that the red cloak rippled. "If you want to go back, I'll take you. If you don't, tell me where the city lies, and I'll find it. Your race, your city, should have their place in history." He said nothing, but the wine had made me very shrewd, and I could guess at what was going on in the stranger's mind. I got up. "Consider it," I told him. "You can find me at the serai by the northern gate until the lesser moon is up. Then I'll be gone." "Wait." His fingers fastened on my wrist. They hurt. I looked into his face, and I did not like what I saw there. But, as Kardec had mentioned, I was not given much to wisdom. The stranger said, "Your men will not go beyond the wells of Carthedon." "Then we'll go without them." A long, long silence. Then he said, "So be it." I knew what he was thinking as plainly as though he had spoken the words. He was thinking that I was only an earthman, and that he would kill me when we came in sight of Shandakor. Chapter 2. The caravan tracks branch off at the wells of Carthedon. One goes westward into Shun, and one goes north through the passes of Barrakesh. But there is a third one, more ancient than the others. It goes toward the east, and it is never used. The deep rock wells are dry, and the stone-built shelters have vanished under the rolling dunes. It is not until the track begins to climb the mountains that there are even memories. Kardec refused politely to go beyond the wells. He would wait for me, he said, a certain length of time, and if I came back, we would go on into the Shun. If I didn't, well, his full pay was left in charge of the local headman. He would collect it and go home. He had not liked having the stranger with us. He had doubled his price. In all that long march up from Barrakesh, I had not been able to get a word out of Kardec or the men concerning Shandakor. The stranger had not spoken either. He had told me his name, Corin, and nothing more. Cloaked and cowled, he rode alone and brooded. His private devils were still with him, and he had a new one now, impatience. He would have ridden us all to death if I'd let him. So Corin and I went east alone from Carthedon with 2 led animals and all the water we could carry, and now I could not hold him back. "There is no time to stop," he said. "The days are running out. There is no time." When we reached the mountains, we had only 3 animals left, and when we crossed the first ridge, we were afoot and leading the one remaining beast which carried the dwindling waterskins. We were following a road now, partly hewn and partly worn. It led up and over the mountains, those naked, leaning mountains that were full of silence and peopled only with the shapes of red rock that the wind had carved. "Armies used to come this way," said Corin. "Kings and caravans and beggars and human slaves, singers and dancing girls and the embassies of princes. This was the road to Shandakor." And we went along it at a madman's pace. The beast fell in a slide of rock and broke its neck, and we carried the last waterskin between us. It was not a heavy burden. It grew lighter, and then was almost gone. One afternoon, long before sunset, Corin said abruptly, "We will stop here." The road went steeply up before us. There was nothing to be seen or heard. Corin sat down in the drifted dust. I crouched down too, a little distance from him. I watched him. His face was hidden, and he did not speak. The shadows thickened in that deep and narrow way. Overhead, the strip of sky flared saffron, and then red, and then the bright, cruel stars came out. The wind worked at its cutting and polishing of stone, muttering to itself, an old and senile wind, full of dissatisfaction and complaint. There was the dry, faint click of falling pebbles. The gun felt cold in my hand, covered with my cloak. I did not want to use it, but I did not want to die here, on this silent pathway of vanished armies and caravans and kings. A shaft of greenish moonlight crept down between the walls. Corin stood up. "Twice now I have followed lies. Here I am met at last by truth." I said, "I don't understand you." "I thought I could escape the destruction. That was a lie. Then I thought I could return to share it. That too was a lie. Now I see the truth. Shandakor is dying. I fled from that dying, which is the end of the city and the end of my race. The shame of flight is on me, and I can never go back." "What will you do?" "I will die here." "And I—" "Did you think," asked Corin softly, "that I would bring an alien creature in to watch the end of Shandakor?" I moved first. I didn't know what weapons he might have hidden under that dark red cloak. I threw myself over on the dusty rock. Something went past my head with a hiss and a rattle and a flame of light, and then I cut the legs from under him, and he fell down forward, and I got on top of him very fast. He had vitality. I had to hit his head twice against the rock before I could take out of his hands the vicious little instrument of metal rods. I threw it far away. I could not feel any other weapons on him except a knife, and I took that too. Then I got up. I said, "I will carry you to Shandakor." He lay still, draped in the tumbled folds of his cloak. His breath made a harsh sighing in his throat. "So be it." And then he asked for water. I went to where the skin lay and picked it up, thinking that there was perhaps a cupful left. I didn't hear him move. What he did was done very silently, with a sharp-edged ornament. I brought him the water, and it was already over. I tried to lift him up. His eyes looked at me with a curiously brilliant look. Then he whispered 3 words in a language I didn't know, and died. I let him down again. His blood had poured out across the dust, and even in the moonlight I could see that it was not the color of human blood. I crouched there for a long while, overcome with a strange sickness. Then I reached out and pushed that red cowl back to bare his head. It was a beautiful head. I had never seen it. If I had, I would not have gone alone with Corin into the mountains. I would have understood many things if I had seen it, and not for fame nor money would I have gone to Shandakor. His skull was narrow and arched, and the shaping of the bones was very fine. On that skull was a covering of short curling fibers that had an almost metallic luster in the moonlight, silvery and bright. They stirred under my hand, soft silken wires responding of themselves to an alien touch, and even as I took my hand away, the luster faded from them, and the texture changed. When I touched them again, they did not stir. Corin's ears were pointed, and there were silvery tufts on the tips of them. On them, and on his forearms and his breast, were the faint memories of scales, a powdering of shining dust across the golden skin. I looked at his teeth, and they were not human either. I knew now why Corin had laughed when I told him that I studied men. It was very still. I could hear the falling of pebbles and the little stones that rolled all lonely down the cliffs, and the shift and whisper of dust in the settling cracks. The wells of Carthedon were far away, too far by several lifetimes for one man on foot with a cup of water. I looked at the road that went steep and narrow on ahead. I looked at Corin. The wind was cold, and the shaft of moonlight was growing thin. I did not want to stay alone in the dark with Corin. I rose and went on along the road that led to Shandakor. It was a long climb, but not a long way. The road came out between two pinnacles of rock. Below that gateway, far below in the light of the little low moons that passed so swiftly over Mars, there was a mountain valley. Once around that valley there were great peaks crowned with snow and crags of black and crimson where the flying lizards nested, the hawk lizards with the red eyes. Below the crags there were forests, purple and green and gold, and black tarn deep on the valley floor. But when I saw it, it was dead. The peaks had fallen away, and the forests were gone, and the tarn was only a pit in the naked rock. In the midst of that desolation stood a fortress city. There were lights in it, soft lights of many colors. The outer walls stood up, black and massive, a barrier against the creeping dust, and within them was an island of life. The high towers were not ruined, the lights burned among them, and there was movement in the streets. A living city, and Corin had said that Shandakor was almost dead. A rich and living city. I did not understand, but I knew one thing. Those who moved along the distant streets of Shandakor were not human. I stood shivering in that windy pass. The bright towers of the city beckoned, and there was something unnatural about all light life in the deathly valley. And then I thought that, human or not, the people of Shandakor might sell me water and a beast to carry it, and I could get away out of these mountains back to the wells. The road broadened, winding down the slope. I walked in the middle of it, not expecting anything, and suddenly 2 men came out of nowhere and barred the way. I yelled. I jumped backward with my heart pounding and the sweat pouring off me. I saw their broadswords glitter in the moonlight, and they laughed. They were human. One was a tall red barbarian from Mech, which lay to the east, half around Mars. The other was a leaner, browner man from Tarak, which was farther still. I was scared and angry and astonished, and I asked a foolish question. "What are you doing here?" "We wait," said the man of Tarak. He made a circle with his arm to take in all the darkling slopes around the valley. "From Kesh and Shun, from all the countries of the Norlands and the marches, men have come to wait. And you?" "I'm lost," I said. "I'm an Earthman, and I have no quarrel with anyone." I was still shaking, but now it was with relief. I would not have to go to Shandakor. If there was a barbarian army gathered here, it must have supplies, and I could deal with them. I told them what I needed. "I can pay for them, pay well." They looked at each other. "Very well, come, and you can bargain with the chief." They fell in on either side of me. We walked 3 paces, and then I was on my face in the dirt, and they were all over me like 2 great wildcats. When they were finished, they had everything I owned, except a few articles of clothing for which they had no use. I got up again, wiping the blood from my mouth. "For an outlander," said the man of Mech, "you fight well." He chinked my money bag up and down in his palm, feeling the weight of it, and then he handed me the leather bottle that hung at his side. "Drink," he told me. "That much I can't deny you. But our water must be carried a long way across these mountains, and we have none to waste on Earthmen." I was not proud. I emptied his bottle for him, And the man of Tarak said, smiling, "Go on to Shandakor. Perhaps they will give you water." "But you've taken all my money." "They are rich in Shandakor. They don't need money. Go ask them for water." They stood there, laughing at some secret joke of their own, and I did not like the sound of it. I could have killed them both and danced on their bodies, but they had left me nothing but my bare hands to fight with. So presently I turned and went on and left them grinning in the dark behind me. The road led down and out across the plain. I could feel eyes watching me, the eyes of the sentinels on the rounding slopes, piercing the dim moonlight. The walls of the city began to rise higher and higher. They hid everything but the top of one tall tower that had a queer, squat globe on top of it. Rods of crystal projected from the globe. It revolved slowly, and the rods sparkled with the sort of white fire that was just on the edge of seeing. A causeway lifted toward the western gate. I mounted it, going very slowly, not wanting to go at all. And now I could see that the gate was open. Open! And this was a city under siege. I stood still for some time, trying to puzzle out what meaning this might have. An army that did not attack, and a city with open gates. I could not find a meaning. There were soldiers on the walls, but they were lounging at their ease under the bright banners. Beyond the gate, many people moved about, but they were intent on their own affairs. I could not hear their voices. I crept closer, closer still. Nothing happened. The sentries did not challenge me, and no one spoke. You know how necessity can force a man against his judgment and against his will. I entered Shandakor. Chapter 3. There was an open space beyond the gate, a square large enough to hold an army. Around its edges were the stalls of merchants. Their canopies were of rich woven stuffs, and the wares they sold were such things as have not been seen on Mars for more centuries than men can remember. There were fruits and rare furs, the long-lost dyes that never fade, furnishings carved from vanished woods. There were spices and wines and exquisite cloths. In one place, a merchant from the far south offered a ceremonial rug woven from the long bright hair of virgins, and it was new. These merchants were all human. The nationalities of some of them I knew. Others I could guess at from traditional accounts. Some were utterly unknown. Of the throngs that moved about among the stalls, quite a number were human also. There were merchant princes come to barter, and there were companies of slaves on their way to the auction block. But the others... I stayed where I was, pressed into a shadowy corner by the gate, and the chill that was on me was not all from the night wind. The golden-skinned, silver-crested lords of Shandakor I knew well enough from Corin. I say lords because that is how they bore themselves, walking proudly in their own place, attended by human slaves. And the humans who were not slaves made way for them and were most deferential, as though they knew that they were greatly favored to be allowed inside the city at all. The women of Shandakor were very beautiful, slim golden sprites with their bright eyes and pointed ears. And there were others, slender creatures with great wings, some who were lithe and furred, some who were hairless and ugly and moved with a sinuous gliding, some so strangely shaped and colored that I could not even guess at their possible evolution. The lost races of Mars. The ancient races, of whose pride and power nothing was left but the half-forgotten tales of old men in the farthest corners of the planet. Even I, who had made the anthropological history of Mars my business, had never heard of them, except as the distorted shapes of legend, as satyrs and giants used to be known on Earth. Yet here they were, in gorgeous trappings, served by naked humans, whose fetters were made of precious metals, and before them, too, the merchants drew aside and bowed. The lights burned, many-colored, not the torches and cressets of the Mars I knew, but cool radiances that fell from crystal globes. The walls of the buildings that rose around the marketplace were faced with rare veined marbles, and the fluted towers that crowned them were inlaid with turquoise and cinnabar, with amber and jade, and the wonderful corals of the southern oceans. The splendid robes and the naked bodies moved in a swirling pattern about the square. There was buying and selling, and I could see the mouths of the people open and shut. The mouths of the women laughed. But in all that crowded place there was no sound, no voice, no scuff of sandal, no chink of mail. There was only silence, the utter stillness of deserted places. I began to understand why there was no need to shut the gates. No superstitious barbarian would venture himself into a city peopled by living phantoms. And I was civilized. I was, in my non-mechanical way, a scientist. And had I not been trapped by my need for water and supplies, I would have run away right out of the valley. But I had no place to run to, and so I stayed and sweated and gagged on the acrid taste of fear. What were these creatures that made no sound? Ghosts, images, dreams? The human and the non-human, the ancient, the proud, the lost and forgotten, who were so insanely present, did they have some subtle form of life I knew nothing about? Could they see me as I saw them? Did they have thought and volition of their own? It was the solidity of them, the intense and perfectly prosaic business in which they were engaged. Ghosts do not barter. They do not hang jeweled necklets upon their women, nor argue about the price of a studded harness. The solidity and the silence, that was the worst of it. If there had been one small, living sound. A dying city, Corin had said. The days are running out. What if they had run out? What if I were here, in this massive pile of stone, with all its countless rooms and streets and galleries and hidden ways, alone with the lights and the soundless phantoms? Pure terror is a nasty thing. I had it then. I began to move, very cautiously, along the wall. I wanted to get away from that marketplace. One of the hairless, gliding non-humans was bartering for a female slave. The girl was shrieking. I could see every drawn muscle in her face, the spasmodic working of her throat. Not the faintest sound came out. I found a street that paralleled the wall. I went along it, catching glimpses of people, human people, inside the lighted buildings. Now and then men passed me, and I hid from them. There was still no sound. I was careful how I set my feet. Somehow I had the idea that if I made a noise, something terrible would happen. A group of merchants came toward me. I stepped back into an archway, and suddenly from behind me there came 3 spangled women of the serais. I was caught. I did not want those silent, laughing women to touch me. I leaped back toward the street, and the merchants paused, turning their heads. I thought that they had seen me. I hesitated, and the women came on. Their painted eyes shone, and their red lips glistened. The ornaments on their bodies flashed. They walked straight into me. I made noise then, all I had in my lungs, and the women passed through me. They spoke to the merchants, and the merchants laughed. They went off together down the street. They hadn't seen me. They hadn't heard me, and when I got in their way, I was no more than a shadow. they passed through me. I sat down on the stones of the street and tried to think. I sat for a long time. Men and women walked through me as through empty air. I sought to remember any sudden pains, as of an arrow in the back that might have killed me between 2 seconds, so that I hadn't known about it. It seemed more likely that I should be the ghost than the other way around. I couldn't remember. My body felt solid to my hands, as did the stones I sat on. They were cold, and finally the cold got me up and sent me on again. There was no reason to hide any more. I walked down the middle of the street, and I got used to not turning aside. I came to another wall, running at right angles, back into the city. I followed that, and it curved around gradually until I found myself back at the marketplace at the inner end of it. There was a gateway with the main part of the city beyond it, and the wall continued. The non-humans passed back and forth through the gate, but no human did except the slaves. I realized then that all this section was a ghetto for the humans who came to Shandakor with the caravans. I remembered how Corin had felt about me, and I wondered, granted that I were still alive, and that some of the people of Shandakor were still on the same plane as myself, how they would feel about me if I trespassed in their city. There was a fountain in the marketplace. The water sprang up sparkling in the colored light and filled a wide basin of carved stone. Men and women were drinking from it. I went to the fountain, but when I put my hands in it, all I felt was a dry basin filled with dust. I lifted my hands and let the dust trickle from them. I could see it clearly, but I saw the water too. A child leaned over and splashed it, and it wetted the garments of the people. They struck the child, and he cried, and there was no sound. I went on through the gate that was forbidden to the human race. The avenues were wide. There were trees and flowers, wide parks and garden villas, great buildings as graceful as they were tall. A wise, proud city, ancient in culture but not decayed, as beautiful as Athens, but rich and strange, with a touch of the alien in every line of it. Can you think what it was like to walk in that city among the silent throngs that were not human, to see the glory of it that was not human either? The towers of jade and cinnabar, the golden minarets, the lights and the colored silks, the enjoyment and the strength. And the people of Shandakor, no matter how far their souls have gone, they will never forgive me. How long I wandered, I don't know. I had almost lost my fear in wonder at what I saw. And then, all at once, in that deathly stillness, I heard a sound, the quick, soft scuffing of sandaled feet. Chapter 4. I stopped where I was, in the middle of a plaza. The tall, silver-crested ones drank wine under canopies of dusky blooms, and in the center a score of winged girls, as lovely as swans, danced a slow, strange measure that was more like flight than dancing. I looked all around. There were many people. How could you tell which one had made a noise? Silence. I turned and ran across the marble paving. I ran hard, and then suddenly I stopped again, listening. Scuff, scuff. No more than a whisper, very light and swift. I spun around, but it was gone. The soundless people walked, and the dancers wove and shifted, spreading their white wings. Someone was watching me. Some one of those indifferent shadows was not a shadow. I went on. Wide streets led off from the plaza. I took one of them. I tried the trick of shifting pace, and 2 or 3 times I caught the echo of other steps than mine. Once I knew it was deliberate. Whoever followed me slipped silently among the noiseless crowd, blending with them, protected by them, only making a show of footsteps now and then to goad me. I spoke to that mocking presence, I talked to it, and listened to my own voice ringing hollow from the walls. The groups of people ebbed and flowed around me, and there was no answer. I tried making sudden leaps here and there among the passers-by with my arms outspread, but all I caught was empty air. I wanted a place to hide, and there was none. The street was long. I went its length, and the someone followed me. There were many buildings, all lighted and populous, and deathly still. I thought of trying to hide in the buildings, but I could not bear to be closed in between walls with those people who were not people. I came into a great circle where a number of avenues met around the very tall tower I had seen with the revolving globe on top of it. I hesitated, not knowing which way to go. Someone was sobbing, and I realized that it was myself, laboring to breathe. Sweat ran into the corners of my mouth, and it was cold and bitter. A pebble dropped at my feet with a brittle click. I bolted out across the square 4 or 5 times without reason, like a rabbit caught in the open. I changed course and fetched up with my back against an ornamental pillar. From somewhere there came a sound of laughter. I began to yell. I don't know what I said. Finally, I stopped, and there was only the silence and the passing throngs who did not see nor hear me. And now it seemed to me that the silence was full of whispers just below the threshold of hearing. A second pebble clattered off the pillar above my head. Another stung my body. I sprang away from the pillar. There was laughter, and I ran. There were infinities of streets, all glowing with color. There were many faces, strange faces, and robes blown out on a night wind, litters with scarlet curtains, and beautiful cars like chariots drawn by beasts. They flowed past me like smoke, without sound, without substance, and the laughter pursued me, and I ran. 4 men of Shandakor came toward me. I plunged through them, but their bodies opposed mine. Their hands caught me, and I could see their eyes, their black, shining eyes, looking at me. I struggled briefly, and then it was suddenly very dark. The darkness caught me up and took me somewhere. Voices talked far away. One of them was a light, young, shiny sort of voice. It matched the laughter that had haunted me down the streets. I hated it. I hated it so much that I fought to get free of the black river that was carrying me. There was a vertiginous whirling of light and sound and stubborn shadow, and then things steadied down, and I was ashamed of myself for having passed out. I was in a room. It was fairly large, very beautiful, very old. The first place I'd seen in Shandakor that showed real age, Martian age, that runs back before history had begun on Earth. The floor, of some magnificent somber stone the color of a moonless night, and the pale, slim pillars that upheld the arching roof, all showed the hollowings and smoothnesses of centuries. The wall paintings had dimmed and softened, and the rugs that burned in pools of color on that dusky floor were worn as thin as silk. There were men and women in that room, the alien folk of Shandakor, but these breathed and spoke and were alive. One of them, a girl child with slender thighs and little pointed breasts, leaned against a pillar close beside me. Her black eyes watched me, full of dancing lights. When she saw that I was awake again, she smiled and flicked a pebble at my feet. I got up. I wanted to get that golden body between my hands and make it scream. And she said in High Martian, "Are you a human? I have never seen one before, close to." A man in a dark robe said, "Be still, Duani." He came and stood before me. He did not seem to be armed, but others were, and I remembered Corin's little weapon. I got hold of myself and did none of the things I wanted to do. "What are you doing here?" asked the man in the dark robe. I told him about myself and Corin, omitting only the fight that he and I had had before he died, and I told him how the hillmen had robbed me. "They sent me here," I finished, "to ask for water." Someone made a harsh, humorless sound. The man before me said, "They were in a jesting mood." "Surely you can spare some water and a beast." "Our beasts were slaughtered long ago, and as for water—" He paused, then asked bitterly, "Don't you understand? We are dying here of thirst." I looked at him and at the she-imp called Duani and the others. "You don't show any signs of it," I said. "You saw how the human tribes have gathered like wolves upon the hills. What do you think they wait for? A year ago they found and cut the buried aqueduct that brought water into Shandakor from the polar cap. All they needed then was patience, and their time is very near. The store we had in the cisterns is almost gone." A certain anger at their submissiveness made me say, "Why do you stay here and die like mice, bottled up in a jar? You could have fought your way out. I've seen your weapons." "Our weapons are old, and we are very few. And suppose that some of us did survive. Tell me again, Earthman, how did Corin fare in the world of men?" He shook his head. "Once we were great, and Shandakor was mighty. The human tribes of half a world paid tribute to us. We are only the last poor shadow of our race, but we will not beg from men." "Besides," said Duani softly, "where else could we live but in Shandakor?" "What about the others?" I asked. "The silent ones?" "They are the past," said the dark-robed man, and his voice rang like a distant flare of trumpets. Still, I did not understand. I did not understand at all. But before I could ask more questions, a man came up and said, "Rule, you will have to die." The tufted tips of Duani's ears quivered, and her crest of silver curls came almost erect. "No, Rule," she cried, "at least not right away." There was a clamor from the others, chiefly in a rapid, angular speech that must have predated all the syllables of men. And the one who had spoken before to Rule repeated, "He will have to die. He has no place here, and we can't spare water." "I'll share mine with him," said Duani, "for a while." I didn't want any favors from her, and said so. "I came here after supplies. You haven't any, so I'll go away again. It's as simple as that. I couldn't buy from the barbarians, but I might shift to steal." Rule shook his head. "I'm afraid not. We are only a handful. For years, our single defense has been the living ghosts of our past who walk the streets, the shadows who man the walls. The barbarians believe in enchantments. If you were to enter Shandakor and leave it again alive, the barbarians would know that the enchantment cannot kill. They would not wait any longer." Angrily, because I was afraid, I said, "I can't see what difference that would make. You're going to die in a short while anyway." "But in our own way, Earthman, and in our own time. Perhaps, being human, you can't understand that. It is a question of pride. The oldest race of Mars will end well as it began." He turned away with a small nod of the head that said, "Kill him," as easily as that, and I saw the ugly little weapons rise. Chapter 5. There was a split second then that seemed like a year. I thought of many things, but none of them were any good. It was a devil of a place to die without even a human hand to help me under. And then Duani flung her arms around me.
"You're all so full of dying and big thoughts," she yelled at them, "and you're all paired off or so old you can't do anything but think. What about me? I don't have anyone to talk to, and I'm sick of wandering alone, thinking how I'm going to die. Let me have him just for a little while. I told you I'd share my water."
On Earth, a child might talk that way about a stray dog, and it is written in an old book that a live dog is better than a dead lion. I hoped they would let her keep me. They did. Rule looked at Duani with a sort of wary compassion and lifted his hand. "Wait," he said to the men with the weapons. "I have thought how this human may be useful to us. We have so little time left now that it is a pity to waste any of it, yet much of it must be used up in tending the machine. He could do that labor, and a man can keep alive on very little water." The others thought that over. Some of them dissented violently, not so much on the grounds of water as that it was unthinkable that a human should intrude on the last days of Shandakor. Corin had said the same thing, but Rule was an old man. The tufts of his pointed ears were colorless as glass, and his face was graven deep with years, and wisdom had distilled in him its bitter brew. "A human of our own world, yes, but this man is of Earth, and the men of Earth will come to be the new rulers of Mars as we were the old. And Mars will love them no better than she did us, because they are as alien as we. So it is not unfitting that he should see us out." They had to be content with that. I think they were already so close to the end that they did not really care. By ones and twos they left as though already they had wasted too much time away from the wonders that there were in the streets outside. Some of the men still held the weapons on me, and others went and brought precious chains, such as the human slaves had worn, shackles, so that I could not escape. They put them on me, and Duani laughed. "Come," said Rule, "and I will show you the machine." He led me from the room and up a winding stair. There were tall embrasures, and looking through them, I discovered that we were in the base of the very high tower with the globe. They must have carried me back to it after Duani had chased me with her laughter and her pebbles. I looked out over the glowing streets, so full of splendor and of silence, and asked Rule why there were no ghosts inside the tower. "You have seen the globe with the crystal rods?"
"Yes."
"We are under the shadow of its core. There had to be some retreat for us into reality, otherwise we would lose the meaning of the dream." The winding stair went up and up. The chain between my ankles clattered musically. Several times I tripped on it and fell.
"Never mind," Duani said. "You'll grow used to it."
We came at last into a circular room high in the tower, and I stopped and stared. Most of the space in that room was occupied by a web of metal girders that supported a great gleaming shaft. The shaft disappeared upward through the roof. It was not tall, but very massive, revolving slowly and quietly. There were traps, presumably for access to the offset shaft and the cogs that turned it. A ladder led to a trap in the roof. All the visible metal was sound, with only a little surface corrosion. What the alloy was, I don't know, and when I asked Rule, he only smiled rather sadly. "Knowledge is found," he said, "only to be lost again. Even we of Shandakor forget." Every bit of that enormous structure had been shaped and polished and fitted into place by hand. Nearly all the Martian peoples work in metal. They seem to have a genius for it, and while they are not and apparently never have been mechanical, as some of our races are on Earth, they find many uses for metal that we have never thought of. But this before me was certainly the high point of the metal worker's craft. When I saw what was down below, the beautifully simple power plant, and the rotary drive setup with fewer moving parts than I would have thought possible, I was even more respectful. "How old is it?" I asked, and again Rule shook his head. "Several thousand years ago there is a record of the yearly hosting of the shadows, and it was not the first." He motioned me to follow him up the ladder, bidding Duani sternly to remain where she was. She came anyway. There was a railed platform open to the universe, and directly above it swung the mighty globe with its crystal rods that gleamed so strangely. Shandakor lay beneath us, a tapestry of many colors, bright and still, and out along the dark sides of the valley the tribesmen waited for the light to die. "When there is no one left to tend the machine, it will stop in time, and then the men who have hated us so long will take what they want of Shandakor. Only fear has kept them out this long. The riches of half a world flowed through these streets, and much of it remained." He looked up at the globe. "Yes," he said, "we had knowledge. More, I think, than any other race of Mars." "But you wouldn't share it with the humans." Rule smiled. "Would you give little children weapons to destroy you? We gave men better plowshares and brighter ornaments, and if they invented a machine, we did not take it from them. But we did not tempt and burden them with knowledge that was not their own. They were content to make war with sword and spear, and so they had more pleasure and less killing, and the world was not torn apart." "And you, how did you make war?" "We defended our city. The human tribes had nothing that we coveted, so there was no reason to fight them except in self-defense. When we did, we won." He paused. "The other non-human races were more stupid or less fortunate. They perished long ago." He turned again to his explanations of the machine. "It draws its power directly from the sun. Some of the solar energy is converted and stored within the globe to serve as the light source. Some is sent down to turn the shaft."
"What if it should stop," Duani said, "while we're still alive?"
She shivered, looking out over the beautiful streets. "It won't, not if the Earthman wishes to live." "What would I have to gain by stopping it?" I demanded. "Nothing, and that," said Rule, "is why I trust you. As long as the globe turns, you are safe from the barbarians. After we are gone, you will have the pick of the loot of Shandakor." How I was going to get away with it afterward, he did not tell me. He motioned me down the ladder again, but I asked him, "What is the globe, Rule? How does it make the shadows?" He frowned. "I can only tell you what has become, I'm afraid, mere traditional knowledge. Our wise men studied deeply into the properties of light. They learned that light has a definite effect upon solid matter, and they believed, because of that effect, that stone and metal and crystalline things retain a memory of all that they have seen. Why this should be, I do not know." I didn't try to explain to him the quantum theory and the photoelectric effect, nor the various experiments of Einstein and Millikan and the men who followed them. I didn't know them well enough myself, and the old High Martian is deficient in such terminology. I only said, "The wise men of my world also know that the impact of light tears away tiny particles from the substance it strikes." I was beginning to get a glimmering of the truth. Light patterns cut in the electrons of metal and stone. Sound patterns cut in unlikely-looking mediums of plastic, each needing only the proper needle to recreate the recorded melody or the recorded picture. "They constructed the globe," said Hrul. "I do not know how many generations that required, nor how many failures they must have had. But they found at last the invisible light that makes the stones give up their memories." In other words, they'd found their needle. What wavelength or combination of wavelengths in the electromagnetic spectrum flowed out from those crystal rods, there was no way for me to know. But where they probed the walls and the paving blocks of Shandakor, they scanned the hidden patterns that were buried in them and brought them forth again in form and color, as the electron needle brings forth whole symphonies from a little rigid disk. How they had achieved sequence and selectivity was another matter. Hrul said something about the memories having different lengths. Perhaps he meant depth of penetration. The stones of Shandakor were ages old, and the outer surfaces would have worn away. The earliest impressions would be gone altogether, or at least have become fragmentary and extremely shallow. Perhaps the scanning beams could differentiate between the overlapping layers of impressions by that fraction of a micron difference in depth. Photons only penetrate so far into any given substance, but if that substance is constantly growing less in thickness, the photons would have the effect of going deeper. I imagine the globe was accurate in centuries, or numbers of centuries, not in years. However it was, the shadows of a golden past walked the streets of Shandakor, and the last men of the race waited quietly for death, remembering their glory. Hrul took me below again and showed me what my tasks would be, chiefly involving a queer sort of lubricant and a careful watch over the power leads. I would have to spend most of my time there, but not all of it. During the free periods, Duani might take me where she would. The old man went away. Duani leaned herself against a girder and studied me with an intense interest.
"How are you called?"
she asked. "John Ross."
"John Ross,"
she repeated and smiled. She began to walk around me, touching my hair, inspecting my arms and chest, taking a child's delight in discovering all the differences there were between herself and what we call a human. And that was the beginning of my captivity. Chapter 6. There were days and nights, scant food and scanter water. There was Duani, and there was Shandakor. I lost my fear, and whether I lived to occupy the chair or not, this was something to have seen. Duani was my guide. I was tender of my duties because my neck depended on them, but there was time to wander in the streets, to watch the crowded pageant that was not, and to sense the stillness and the desolation that were so cruelly real. I began to get the feel of what this alien culture had been like and how it had dominated half a world without the need of conquest. In a hall of government, built of white marble and decorated with wall friezes of austere magnificence, I watched the careful choosing and the crowning of a king. I saw the places of learning. I saw the young men, trained for war, as fully as they were instructed in the arts of peace. I saw the pleasure gardens, the theaters, the forums, the sporting fields, and I saw the places of work where the men and women of Shandakor coaxed beauty from their looms and forges to trade for the things they wanted from the human world. The human slaves were brought by their own kind to be sold, and they seemed to be well treated, as one treats a useful animal in which one has invested money. They had their work to do, but it was only a small part of the work of the city. The things that could be had nowhere else on Mars, the tools, the textiles, the fine work in metal and precious stones, the glass and porcelain, were fashioned by the people of Shandakor, and they were proud of their skill. Their scientific knowledge they kept entirely to themselves, except what concerned agriculture or medicine or better ways of building drains and houses. They were the lawgivers, the teachers, and the humans took all they would give and hated them for it. How long it had taken these people to attain such a degree of civilization, Duani could not tell me. Neither could Hrul. It is certain that we lived in communities, had a form of civil government, a system of numbers and written speech before the human tribes. There are traditions of an earlier race than ours, from whom we learned these things. Whether or not this is true, I do not know. In its prime, Shandakor had been a vast and flourishing city with countless thousands of inhabitants. Yet I could see no signs of poverty or crime. I couldn't even find a prison. Murder was punishable by death, said Hrul, but it was most infrequent. Theft was for slaves. We did not stoop to it. He watched my face, smiling a little acid smile. That startles you, a great city without suffering or crime or places of punishment. I had to admit that it did. Elder race or not, how did you manage to do it? I'm a student of cultures, both here and on my own world. I know all the usual patterns of development, and I've read all the theories about them, but Shandakor doesn't fit any of them. Hrul's smile deepened. You are human, he said. Do you wish the truth? Of course. Then I will tell you. We developed the faculty of reason. For a moment I thought he was joking. Come, I said, man is a reasoning being, on Earth the only reasoning being. I do not know of Earth, he answered courteously, but on Mars man has always said, I reason, I am above the beasts because I reason. And he has been very proud of himself because he could reason. It is the mark of his humanity. Being convinced that reason operates automatically within him, he orders his life and his government upon emotion and superstition. He hates and fears and believes, not with reason, but because he is told to by other men or by tradition. He does one thing and says another, and his reason teaches him no difference between fact and falsehood. His bloodiest wars are fought for the merest whim, and that is why we did not give him weapons. His greatest follies appear to him the highest wisdom, his basest betrayals become noble acts, and that is why we could not teach him justice. We learned to reason, man only learned to talk. I understood then why the human tribes had hated the men of Shandakor. I said angrily, perhaps that is so on Mars, but only reasoning minds can develop great technologies, and we humans of Earth have outstripped yours 1,000,000 times. All right, you know some things we haven't learned yet, in optics and some branches of electronics, and perhaps in metallurgy, but... I went on to tell him all the things we had that Shandakor did not. You never went beyond the beast of burden and the simple wheel. We achieved flight long ago. We have conquered space and the planets. We'll go on to conquer the stars. Hrul nodded. Perhaps we were wrong. We remained here and conquered ourselves. He looked out toward the slopes where the barbarian army waited, and he sighed, In the end, it is all the same. Days and nights and Duani, bringing me food, sharing her water, asking questions, taking me through the city. The only thing she would not show me was something they called the place of sleep. I shall be there soon enough, she said, and shivered. How long? I asked. It was an ugly thing to say. We are not told. Hrul watches the level in the cisterns, and when it's time... She made a gesture with their hands. Let's go up on the wall. We went up among the ghostly soldiery and the phantom banners. Outside there were darkness and death and the coming of death. Inside there were light and beauty, the last proud blaze of Shandakor under the shadow of its doom. There was an eerie magic in it that had begun to tell on me. I watched Duani. She leaned against the parapet, looking outward. The wind ruffled her silver crest, pressed her garments close against her body. Her eyes were full of moonlight, and I could not read them. Then I saw that there were tears. I put my arm around her shoulders. She was only a child, an alien child, not of my race or breed.
John Ross?
Yes?
There are so many things I will never know.
It was the first time I had touched her. Those curious curls stirred under my fingers, warm and alive. The tips of her pointed ears were soft as a kitten's. Duani.
What?
I don't know. I kissed her. She drew back and gave me a startled look from those black brilliant eyes, and suddenly I stopped thinking that she was a child, and I forgot that she was not human, and I didn't care. Duani, listen. You don't have to go to the place of sleep. She looked at me, her cloak spread out upon the night wind, her hands against my chest. There's a whole world out there to live in, and if you aren't happy there, I'll take you to my world, to Earth. There isn't any reason why you have to die. Still, she looked at me and did not speak. In the streets below, the silent throngs went by, and the towers glowed with many colors. Duani's gaze moved slowly to the darkness beyond the wall, to the barren valley and the hostile rocks.
No.
Why not? Because of rule? Because of all this talk of pride and race?
Because of truth. Corin learned it.
I didn't want to think about Corin. He was alone. You're not. You'd never be alone. She brought her hands up and laid them on my cheeks very gently.
That green star, that is your world. Suppose it were to vanish, and you were the last of all the men of Earth. Suppose you lived with me in Shandakor forever. Would you not be alone?
It wouldn't matter if I had you. She shook her head.
It would matter, and our two races are as far apart as the stars. We would have nothing to share between us.
Remembering what Rule had told me, I flared up and said some angry things. She let me say them, and then she smiled.
It is none of that, John Ross.
She turned to look out over the city.
This is my place and no other. When it is gone, I must be gone too.
Quite suddenly, I hated Shandakor. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time Duani left me, I was afraid she might never come back. Rule would tell me nothing, and I didn't dare to question him too much. The hours rushed by like seconds, and Duani was happy, and I was not. My shackles had magnetic locks. I couldn't break them, and I couldn't cut the chains. One evening, Duani came to me with something in her face and in the way she moved that told me the truth long before I could make her put it into words. She clung to me, not wanting to talk, but at last she said,
Today there was a casting of lots, and the first 100 have gone to the place of sleep.
It is beginning, then. She nodded.
Every day there will be another 100 until all are gone.
I couldn't stand it any longer. I thrust her away and stood up. You know where the keys are. Get these chains off me. She shook her head.
Let us not quarrel now, John Ross. Come, I want to walk in the city.
We'd quarreled more than once, and fiercely. She would not leave Shandakor, and I couldn't take her out by force as long as I was chained, and I was not to be released until everyone but Rule had entered the place of sleep, and the last page of that long history had been written. I walked with her among the dancers and the slaves and the bright-cloaked princes. There were no temples in Shandakor. If they worshipped anything, it was beauty, and to that their whole city was a shrine. Duani's eyes were rapt, and there was a remoteness on her now. I held her hand and looked at the towers of turquoise and cinnabar, the pavings of rose quartz and marble, the walls of pink and white and deep red coral, and to me they were hideous. The ghostly crowds, the mockery of life, the phantom splendors of the past were hideous, a drug, a snare. The faculty of reason, I thought, and saw no reason in any of it. I looked up to where the great globe turned and turned against the sky, keeping these mockeries alive. Have you ever seen the city as it is, without the shadows?
No, I think only Rule, who is the oldest, remembers it that way. I think it must have been very lonely. Even then, there were less than 3,000 of us left.
It must indeed have been lonely. They must have wanted the shadows as much to people the empty streets as to fend off the enemies who believed in magic. I kept looking at the globe. We walked for a long time, and then I said, I must go back to the tower. She smiled at me very tenderly.
Soon you will be free of the tower, and of these.
She touched the chains.
No, don't be sad, John Ross. You will remember me and Shandakor as one remembers a dream.
She held up her face that was so lovely and so unlike the meaty faces of human women, and her eyes were full of somber lights. I kissed her, and then I caught her up in my arms and carried her back to the tower. In that room where the great shaft turned, I told her, I have to tend to things below. Go up onto the platform, Duani, where you can see all Shandakor. I'll be with you soon. I don't know whether she had some hint of what was in my mind, or whether it was only the imminence of parting that made her look at me as she did. I thought she was going to speak, but she did not, climbing the ladder obediently. I watched her slender golden body vanish upward, then I went into the chamber below. There was a heavy metal bar there that was part of a manual control for regulating the rate of turn. I took it off its pin. Then I closed the simple switches on the power plant. I tore out all the leads and smashed the connections with the bar. I did what damage I could to the cogs and the offset shaft. I worked very fast. Then I went up into the main chamber again. The great shaft was still turning, but slowly, ever more slowly. There was a cry from above me, and I saw Duani. I sprang up the ladder, thrusting her back onto the platform. The globe moved heavily of its own momentum. Soon it would stop, but the white fires still flickered in the crystal rods. I climbed up onto the railing, clinging to a strut. The chains on my wrists and ankles made it hard, but I could reach. Duani tried to pull me down. I think she was screaming. I hung on and smashed the crystal rods with the bar, as many as I could. There was no more motion, no more light. I got down on the platform again and dropped the bar. Duani had forgotten me. She was looking at the city. The lights of many colors that had burned there were burning still, but they were old and dim, cold embers without radiance. The towers of jade and turquoise rose up against the little moons, and they were broken and cracked with time, and there was no glory in them. They were desolate and very sad. The night lay clotted around their feet. The streets, the plazas, and the market squares were empty, their marble paving blank and bare. The soldiers had gone from the walls of Shandakor with their banners and their bright mail, and there was no longer any movement anywhere within the gates. Duani let out one small, voiceless cry, and as though in answer to it, suddenly from the darkness of the valley and the slopes beyond, there rose a thin, fierce howling as of wolves.
"Why?" she whispered. "Why?"
She turned to me. Her face was pitiful. I caught her to me. I couldn't let you die, not for dreams and visions, nothing. Look, Duani, look at Shandakor. I wanted to force her to understand. Shandakor is broken and ugly and forlorn. It is a dead city, but you're alive. There are many cities, but only one life for you. Still, she looked at me, and it was hard to meet her eyes. She said,
"We knew all that, John Ross."
"Duani, you're a child. You've only a child's way of thought. Forget the past and think of tomorrow. We can get through the barbarians. Corin did, and after that—"
"And after that, you would still be human, and I would not."
From below us in the dim and empty streets, there came a sound of lamentation. I tried to hold her, but she slipped out from between my hands.
"And I am glad that you are human," she whispered. "You will never understand what you have done."
And she was gone before I could stop her, down into the tower. I went after her, down the endless winding stairs, with my chains clattering between my feet, out into the streets, the dark and broken and deserted streets of Shandakor. I called her name, and her golden body went before me, fleet and slender, distant and more distant. The chains dragged upon my feet, and the night took her away from me. I stopped. The whelming silence rushed smoothly over me, and I was bitterly afraid of this dark, dead Shandakor that I did not know. I called again to Duani, and then I began to search for her in the shattered, shadowed streets. I know not how long it must have been before I found her. For when I found her, she was with the others, the last people of Shandakor, the men and the women first, were walking silently in a long line toward a low, flat-roofed building that I knew, without telling, was the place of sleep. They were going to die, and there was no pride in their faces now. There was a sickness in them, a sickness and a hurt in their eyes as they moved heavily forward, not looking, not wanting, to look at the sordid, ancient streets that I had stripped of glory. "Duani!" I called, and ran forward, but she did not turn in her place in the line, and I saw that she was weeping. Rule turned toward me, and his look had a wary contempt that was bitterer than a curse. "Of what use, after all, to kill you now?" "But I did this thing. I did it." "You are only human." The long line shuffled on, and Duani's little feet were closer to that final doorway. Rule looked upward at the sky. "There is still time before the sunrise. The women, at least, will be spared the indignity of spears." "Let me go with her." I tried to follow her, to take my place in line, and the weapon in Rule's hand moved, and there was the pain, and I lay as Corin had lain, while they went silently on into the place of sleep. The barbarians found me when they came, still half doubtful, into the city after dawn. I think they were afraid of me. I think they feared me as a wizard who had somehow destroyed all the folk of Shandakor, for they broke my chains and healed my wounds, and later they even gave me out of the loot of Shandakor the only thing I wanted, a bit of porcelain shaped like the head of a young girl. I sit in the chair that I craved at the university, and my name is written on the roll of discoverers. I am eminent, I am respectable, I who murdered the glory of a race. Why didn't I go after Duani into the place of sleep? I could have crawled, I could have dragged myself across those stones, and I wish to God I had. I wish that I had died with Shandakor.